So where were you when the 1967 Grand National took place at Aintree? Perhaps you weren't even born. I was. I was approaching my 9th birthday, and for my generation of racing fan, that is the Grand National that is etched on our memories. It was the first race to carry my money, and thanks to my dad, my pocket money went on Honey End, for no greater reason than the name. One of my 3 elder brothers had a different each-way bet. He went for a 101 shot called Foinavon. The outsider only went and won. But only because of a pileup, the likes of which has not been seen since at Aintree. The respected sports writer David Owen has written a fine book about Foinavon and about that unforgettable Grand National, and I heartily recommend you buy it. I sat down with David at his home to find out more about a horse that very few punters backed on that murky, grim day at Aintree in 1967. A horse that would forever lend its name thereafter to one particular fence at Aintree. At the end of our chat, at the end of the film, there's a chance for you to win a signed copy of the book Foinavon. Foinavon, where does the name come from and what was his pedigree?
The name comes from a mountain at the very north of Scotland. There were 3 mountains in a row in Anne, Duchess of Westminster's estate. You know, she was a very well-known horse owner in the 60s. The mountains were Ben Stack, Arkle and Foinavon.
Foinavon, I should be saying Foinavon.
Well, that's kind of how they say it up there. It's like Foinavon, almost like a B as well.
Right.
Absolutely beautiful. Well, you probably saw the picture in the book. It's a gorgeous part of the world. But she bought 3 horses, the Duchess, not quite at the same time, but 2 of them at the same time, and then Foinavon about 6 months later. The first 2 she called after the first 2 mountains.
Right.
Ben Stack, who was a very good chaser, won the champion chase at Cheltenham, I believe. And Arkle, of course, most famous racehorse who ever lived, I should think, National Hunt. And then Foinavon. I mean, the sire, as it turned out, was Vulcan, who, of course, in later years, is again just about the most prodigious National Hunt sire there's ever been. 3 Grand National winners he produced and numerous other. I mean, that's why in the 60s and 70s so many National Hunt horses had VUL in their names, like Vulcan. But 58, I think Foinavon was foaled, and that was, you know, we didn't quite know how good Vulcan's horse offspring were going to be. He'd been a reasonably good racehorse, but not a brilliant racehorse. So that's why Foinavon was inexpensive. Draper took him on.
This is Tom Draper, isn't it?
Tom,
Jim's the son now.
Yeah, not Jim.
Jim's the son now, yeah.
Yeah. Who did already have a very good reputation. And initially, I was told they thought Foinavon was going to be the star. They thought Arkle was rather unimpressive. I mean, I guess Arkle isn't, if you think of his conformation, he's, you know, if you were given a kit to make your ideal racehorse, you wouldn't have Arkle, would you?
No.
But particularly when he was younger, he was apparently very weedy around the back end. Foinavon was a very good looking horse. I've got a picture of his lad Peter McLaughlin in the yard soon after he arrived, and you can see he looks terrific. But Foinavon's problem turned out to be he had far more motor, far more muscle in the front half than the back half.
Right.
So he'd keep going, but he didn't have any turn of speed.
But Foinavon's early career didn't exactly set the racing world alight.
No, or indeed his later career, apart from one day. No, he started off first season in flat, 2 flat races, 2 bumpers. I think he may have come 4th once. Then the next season, he had a season hurdling, then a season 2 mile chases, and then, you know, the real McCoy. He wasn't hopeless, but it's just that the expectations of him were initially so high. He went over to Cheltenham with Arkle in, I think, 62. and there was a sort of whisper. There was a tiny little piece in the Times saying, "Oh, Draper thinks he's got some good horses. We hear, you know." And Foinavon ran early, probably the first day. I think he came third. I think he did all right in a quite big field, but you know, he wasn't champion for.
No.
Arkle ran 2 days later, won by 20 lengths. You know, and I think from that day on, because initially they used to go to the same race meetings together. They didn't usually run in the same races because Arkle was a year older, so a year further on in his
development.
But they used to go in the same box, and then after that, their careers basically went in opposite directions.
Of course. The week before the Grand National of 1967, and Foinavon hasn't got a jockey.
No, he hasn't got a jockey. He also ran the Saturday before at Leicester on April Fool's Day, in the April Fool's Chase. And Foinavon was coming from 3rd or 4th place, going over the second last, looking like he had every chance of coming in the first 2. The stirrup leather broke. Thing is, if that hadn't happened, if he'd won that race, there's no way he'd have gone off in the Grand National at 100 to 1. There were 2 or 3 who wouldn't ride him because Cyril Watkins, the horse's owner, not a particularly well-off man, comfortably off, he was a football pools operator in Reading, didn't see why he should pay the traditional fee that jockeys got for riding the Grand National, which I think was about 100 quid in those days. Didn't want to do that. So it was on the Wednesday that he phoned John, who had ridden Foinavon once before at Cheltenham, just over a year previously. I think it was February '66, at the end of a big freeze, and they come 4th. So he did know the horse. And John, you know, not venal at all, and had never ridden in the National, took the chance with both hands.
His accommodation the night before the Grand National.
Yeah, well, everyone was booked up. You know, he thought he'd be riding at Worcester, like, you know, the other. That was the other meeting of the day. He also had to get out of a couple of rides. Luckily, he had understanding owners. But yeah, there was nowhere left to stay, so he ended up with his brother Tom, who came up with him. They became valets together after his career. Yeah, they ended up sleeping in somebody's front room in one of those little terraced houses next to Aintree. He was sleeping in 2 armchairs pushed together.
1967, the Grand National. We watched it in black and white.
We did.
We'll never forget it. How many horses, can you remember how many horses went to post?
44.
Tipsters, we don't always get it right, but what did the wonderfully titled Mug or Maestro column in the Daily Express have to say about the chances of Foinavon?
So Foinavon has no chance. Not the boldest of jumpers. He can safely be ignored, even in a race noted for shocks. Pretty damning, isn't it?
Very damning. Approaching Beecher's Brook second time around, where was Foinavon? How was he doing?
He was about 5 from the rear. There were nearly 30, there were 28 still going at that point. 2 loose horses in front, one of which was the notorious Pop and Down. The other one was a horse called April Rose that Piers Bengo had been riding, who actually had been round Aintree 3 times before without batting an eyelid, so it was very unusual for April Rose to fall. Anyway, those 2 were at the front, a couple of strides ahead of the top 5 or 6. They were getting quite bunched. Castleford's, Rutherford's, Rondetto, a lot of people, I think it was Alistair Down's favourite horse, Rondetto, was looking very good.
Some people have remembered it being Beecher's Brook where calamity struck, but it wasn't. Tell us about the fence where it all happened.
Well, it was the next fence, the Foinavon fence as it's known now, but it wasn't then. Then it was the one after Beecher's, or the one before the canal turn.
Right.
Smallest fence on the course, so that wasn't always that way, but in '67 it was. And Terry Biddlecombe actually was very prescient about it. He said it's so small in comparison to the others that horses and sometimes jockeys don't respect it. Pop and down, possibly some would speculate, remembering the drop on the previous fence at Beeches, decided he suddenly had enough, having fallen at the first and gone a circuit and a half without a problem, and veered off to his right across the face of the fence. And as I say, he was only a couple of strides in front and caused this literal domino effect among the entire field who were strung out. They tend to, the horses in those days, there were far more varying abilities and standards in the race, and there were 7 or 8 amateur jockeys riding that day as well. So not everyone would hug the inside rail, as tends to be happening more and more at the moment. So it was sprung quite well across the course, but also probably 15-20 horses within 3 or 4 lengths of the lead, and just absolutely took them all out. The unluckiest one was probably Rondetto, who jumped the fence, but Johnny Hayne, who rode very short, seemed to fall off on landing. And April Rose also jumped the fence, the other loose horse. He didn't veer across as much as Pop and Down. And if you watch closely, the April Rose and Rondetto were very close together. It's possible April Rose knocked Johnny Hayne off, but you can't quite see. And if Rondetto had stayed on his feet there, he'd have won by 50 lengths, I should think, the horse of that quality.
John Buckingham, jockey of Foinavon, looks forward, realises he's suddenly in front, but he's got 6 fences left.
Yeah.
And seemingly he had to work hard to get Foinavon home.
Yes, he did. I mean, Foinavon hadn't won for 19 races, as we said. Not used to being in a race out on his own, really. Even when he did win his races, he wasn't a front runner by any stretch. So yeah, the horse wasn't used to that. The crowd would only have been a factor at the end because it was a foul day, if you remember, and there were a few spectators along the course over the last 5 or 6 fences, but most people were at the grandstand. Most people had no idea what happened actually, because he was also, his colours were predominantly black on this horrible foggy day, so nobody had a clue what was going on. But yeah, John had to work pretty hard. Was
any individual ever blamed? Was one horse or one jockey? Did other jockeys say it was his fault or no?
Well, it was Pop and Down.
Pop and Down.
But how can you blame a loose horse for anything, really?
No.
One thing that you see is that on the inside rail, just before the Foinavon fence, there was probably a gap, only about 3 horse lengths, where there was no inside rail.
Right.
And I wonder if Pop and Down was also wearing blinkers, which was another factor, something. But I wonder if he didn't notice, at least subliminally, that gap in the inside rail. If he'd reached the point where he was starting to have had enough, and think, I'm going to dart out, and then by the time he sort of decided, yes, I'm going to dart out, the rail was back again, and therefore he sort of, who knows. But also, if you sort of look at it in slow motion on the British Pathé, as you can do almost frame by frame, he does end up darting out through that gap on the inside after some of the others had got through. I think it was in the run-in. I think it was just before the elbow when Gifford, who Honey End's jockey, is really giving chase to Foinavon, trying to reel him in. You see this riderless horse smash through the inside rail just behind Gifford, and that's Pop and Down re-entering the course.
How many winning bets were there? Or did the total report on Foinavon at 100 to 1.
Yeah, well, the tote actually ended up paying out at 445 to 1.
Did they?
Quite incredible. Most of the winning bets were women.
Right.
Partly because I think, male punters by and large like to pretend they know what's going on, so they tend to steer clear of 100 to 1 unless they have a tip or something. But also because the cosmetics brand Avon, well, I know it did because I spoke to some of them. That was the sort of reason for some women backing him, and a lot of the employees of the Avon company around Corby in particular, where their UK base was, back the horse.
All right.
But there were very few. I spoke to a guy who was working in the tote office at New Bridge Street, which would have taken all bets from around the country, apart from the ones actually at Aintree. He remembers his boss walking out of the office with a handful of chits. A lot of them, 3 or 4 of them, would have belonged to Cyril Watkins, the horse's owner.
Right.
He came out of the office and shouted, "We got nothing to do, lads. We got nothing to do."
It's about 11
Yeah, somewhere between 10 and 20, I think Peter said, the guy I spoke to.
Incredible.
Just extraordinary.
And you mentioned Cyril Watkins there. Was he the biggest winner?
By far, yeah. He got 5 figures, sort of somewhere between 10 and 20,000.
Winnings on his own horse. Yeah.
It's a lot of money in those days.
So there's 2 owners at one point of Foinavon. Yeah. One of them decides, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's not worth the trouble, the horse isn't worth the bother. Incredibly, when Foinavon wins the Grand National, Cyril Waters pays out his former co-owner on the prize money. Not sure that would happen today.
No, it was a very nice thing to do. Benelli basically got fed up because the horse never won. And so they were shelling out the stable fees every month. Yeah. And as I say, neither of them were... you made a nice living out of the pools in those days. Everyone in the country virtually did them,
especially in Liverpool
fans, but they weren't, wealthy.
Right.
He just got fed up and tried to sell his stake. Well, of course, he's lost the last 10 races, so he didn't find any buyers. Cyril Watkins ended up just taking it over, and. No, as I say, it was a very decent gesture to...
So he paid him some of the... Even though he wasn't the owner? He paid him half the prize money?
Yeah, but not half the money he won on.
No, of course not. Who would do that? Was Foinavon a lucky winner of the Grand National?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. But it wasn't just... luck. John Buckingham deserves a lot of credit. He always says that if it hadn't have been for the if the pileup had never happened, he thinks Foinavon would have come 5th or 6th, something like that.
Right.
You make allowances for a jockey's natural optimism.
Hard to know what he bases that on.
Well, he'd probably have come in the top 10. Well, he bases it on. As I say, he rode him 8 or 9 times and got in the first 4 or 6 times. So he did because he had the patience to let him get into the race slowly, always.
Right.
And then that meant he did tend to come up through the field because he'd keep going at the same pace. So anything that tired, he'd overtake. He never tired, but he'd never accelerated either. So he doesn't claim he would have won it. He thinks he'd have done very well.
I don't know how many 100 to 1 winners there have been since. Probably not many.
Malmone,
of course, but nothing between the 2.
Nothing between the 2.
Wow.
I think 4 altogether. Weren't there? Cockoo was one, and they got Tipperary Tim, the one that won when the other time they all fell, and there were only 2 finishes, 28.
But the excitement level, the excitement level of Foinavon winning the Grand National 67 at 100 to 1. Excitement at the course, excitement if you're watching at home, but it did capture the nation, didn't it? Despite everything that was going on in the 60s in those days, it did.
No, it really did, and more away from the course, I think, than at the course, because as I say, it was such a miserable day. Everyone was freezing in the grandstand, didn't really know what was going on. So when Foinavon emerged out of the mist, literally, there was silence. You know, just you can tell there's just no noise from the crowd. The young stable lad who took him up because the head lad went to Worcester with the other horse, Clifford. He didn't know what was happening. He just recognised, you know, by the furlong pole or whatever, when he saw, you know, his horse come out and suddenly realised he was winning. I mean, that was the first time he knew the horse was winning. He was 16 years old then, I think, Clifford. So extraordinary.
And it's full of tales. The book is full of tales of, I don't know, people winning on Foinavon by use of a Ouija board, or people who, as all us punters talk about all the time, close to the horse, people even close to the horse who just missed out on placing a bet. Or
Clifford, I mean, that's it. The queue was too long. He led the horse out on the parade. You know, they still had the old-fashioned parade in those days. They were led. He ran back to the tote window, so he'd have got 440 yards to one. Ran back to the tote window afterwards, and he didn't get served before the off, so he couldn't get his money on. He was going to back 2 shillings each way, I think he told me. But I think, going back to the impression it made, I mean, I think the race had only been televised since 1960 because of Mrs. Topham.
Yeah.
And, you know, that made it, until then it wasn't really a national event. But, you know, the whole country, it was one of those things that by 67 the whole country was watching. And just it was kind of the archetypical Grand National in terms of what kids or people in general imagined the Grand National in those days might be like. You know, that huge pileup, it's what people would think the Grand National should have been like, especially the ones who only watched 2 horse races a year, sort of thing. And I think that captured it, and because again it was on television, that means every year the incident's replayed, and it's become mythologised now, hasn't it? It's become a sporting metaphor.
And what about poor old Foinavon? Did he win another race after the National?
Yeah, he won 2 more races after the National with John riding both times.